We've got a schedule, man. We're busy guys. We're dads.
You're right. You're
Now,
right.
I guess you're wondering why you're here today. Take a seat, Ollie.
Hold
No,
on,
this
let
isn't.
me make myself comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just charged the computer and fully relaxed.
Well, all your friends and family are here because we care about you. We love you. And this is the Big Questions ep about how to talk to kids about drugs and alcohol.
Oh my God. Well, it had the intervention vibe, and it kind of still does.
Yeah. So let's talk. Your kid's 14?
Yeah, last night we attended a get to know the high school. We are on the precipice of Heath leaving the school he's been at since kindergarten and possibly going to public school. So, I mean, let's be honest.
What a
Drugs and
down.
alcohol are everywhere, but
Yeah.
you know.
You know, it's funny. My kids went to a bougie K, I guess you will, preschool
hmm
because there are very limited options in this country and in New York City, although maybe that's changing before pre-kindergarten because now there is universal pre-K. And so they went with all these like celebrity kids and just like trust fund, you know, like generational wealth. And I remember overhearing a woman saying, "Oh, I'll never let my kids go to public school because they just all do drugs there." And my wife was like, "Yeah, they're not
Dude,
doing drugs at private school."
wait,
Sure.
wait, someone really said that? Because that's like, I mean, wow.
Yeah.
I
This
will
woman,
just,
by the way, also has two hot tubs at her Hamptons house because, Ollie, because one of them doesn't work in the winter. And like, isn't that the whole point? So they put another hot tub in Sag Harbor. You know.
I mean, like, I am not going to be out here to criticize someone whose goal or simply just has wealth because that's just going to be the way it is. Like, we have a system, it's called money. It works. It's why we don't have to go hunt buffalo and then cook it and eat it and, like survive. The money, this whole money thing does make life easier. However, I don't understand how you could have that much money and be that stupid. Because let's be honest, that's like the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like, did you not go to college? Hello? I mean, does she not know what
You know,
cocaine
we
is?
haven't been invited to the two hot tub house, so I can't tell you. But you know, that is something we're going to talk about, right? You know, drugs, drinking, smoking. We're talking about it all. We're talking about weed. We're talking about shrooms. We're talking about cocaine, which I still to this day have not seen up close. I know.
It's not too late.
Yeah. All the stuff, right? I mean, and so I grew up with the DARE program. I grew up in a day where, which by the way, has been very maligned, you know, and in revisionist history of that, you know, people say that the DARE program was an MLM for police officers to make a little extra side money and kind
Mm.
of get and then make money on the officers they enlisted. But here's the thing, you know, and my wife always likes to tease, it worked on some kids, and it worked on this guy. Dare worked for me. All right. As did all those little PSAs. There was a video with the Ninja Turtles, a commercial where, you know, a kid was getting handed a joint, looked like a stick of bubble gum. And he was like, "Come on, what are you, chicken? What are you, chicken?" And the kid's like, "I'm not chicken, you're a turkey." And then I think the Ninja Turtles come in and they're like, "Yeah, be like Mike, you know, you know, stand up for yourself and you don't have to do drugs or whatever." And I was like, "Yeah, I love the Ninja Turtles. They've got leadership ability. You know,
Mhm.
they're having fun. They ate pizza." I was like, drugs are not for me. So for
Mm.
me, I just, you know, it never appealed to me.
Mm.
Smoking just was always so gross to me.
Mm.
I never smoked. I think maybe I've had a handful of cigarettes in my life just out of, I was going to say morbid curiosity. How's that morbid curiosity? Didn't dig it, not for me. Tried to smoke a joint, you know, in my 20s. Also, just coughing, not fun. I'm
Oh,
not
wait,
into
so
it.
no cheap for you? None of it? Edibles? Nothing?
So,
Vaping?
as a
None of that stuff?
40-year-old man, I will say in the last couple years, I've dabbled with some brownies and the
Huh.
gummies because I don't like smoke inhalation. And still, it's fun. but it's not my thing. So as a kid, but again, I think there's a danger in the way I was raised though too, because I didn't really get a lot of talks about balance. And hey, maybe one day you are going to want to try drinking, and I did in college, and I went a little too far. And we're going to talk about that. But I'm curious, what what age were you exposed to the drinking and drugs conversation,
Hmm.
smoking? When did you partake? And like, what was the education around that at school and in the home, and amongst your peers? Like, talk us through that.
No education at home. Smoking, drinking was glorified. I feel like drugs were kind of glorified, but honestly, like we're talking about marijuana, period, point blank. We're talking about the 90s and the Midwest. Marijuana has changed so much into the conversation of today. It is still illegal in Texas, but obviously in a lot of places not as much. So I think the way it'll be approached with Heath, it's all so different now. But yeah, sex, drugs, rock and roll, like that was like cool. It was like, yeah, I want to drive a car. Marlboro. People wore like Marlboro clothing. It's like, oh, I smoke so much that I got points and I got this Marlboro jacket. You know, Grew up in the Midwest. The old lipper. The other day I was on a plane. A little girl, an adorable little girl. She was looking out the window. I was in the window seat. She was in the middle. Whatever. I mean, it's Southwest. I got there first. The dad was, over. P.S. I was working on that ice post of ours, and I was waiting for this guy to be like, that's not funny. You know what I mean? I was tilting this laptop like that. I was paranoid. I'm not a confrontational guy. I'm just, you know what I mean? And I was reading the room a bit. What I also read in the room was his can of Copenhagen. I was like, ooh, like I watched him like kind of being like, they just shoot that. That's pretty foul. Done that as well. But yes, all these things were glorified. I wanted to do it. I wanted to be part of that crowd. I would have ignored Michelangelo in that scenario. I mean, like, he wouldn't have even had the time to show up. But it took me a while. It was like senior year before I really kind of got fully immersed in the old marijuana, and then took off like the eventual, dabbling veteran that I became. And it's kind of ironic that now at 48, I'm on day 23 of my dry January, and I'm also, I guess I could almost say, oh, does straight edge? Can you drink caffeine if you're straight edge? That was a 90s term, by the way.
I remember straight edge because I remember straight edge was heavily associated with punk music and people who punk shows at VFWs in New Jersey. And the whole thing was like, I'm hard and I wear spikes on my clothing and I maybe have a chain wallet, but I don't touch the stuff. All
Yeah.
right.
No, you basically weren't a nerd. You could be, a little alpha about your sobriety. But I say all this to say, like, yeah, I just really enjoy my sleep right now. I did stuff, man. I totally did stuff. Never did the needle. Never did the needle. Didn't go that far. But I was in college during the rave scene. Wasn't deep into raves, but I attended a few, and my God, the things I ingested there. Because you don't know, do not know what is in that pill until the next day when you're like, what was in that pill? So yeah, that
Yeah.
was life for me.
So in addition to the DARE program in fifth grade, as I mentioned, which by the way also taught on gun safety, there was a video we saw, maybe have I talked about this before, with Jason Priestley and Eddie the Eagle. And there was a song, and I know we're getting a little off track, but I do want to share this song. It went, if you find that this was, by the way, if you find a gun in the wild, what you're supposed to do. It was, stop, don't touch, leave the area, tell an adult. Stop. Don't touch. Leave the area. Tell an adult. Come on, stop.
No,
Don't
don't
touch.
touch.
Leave
Leave
the
the
area.
area.
Tell an
Tell an
adult.
adult.
And there was this animated Eddie the Eagle, almost like a
Wow. Okay.
rabbit. And Jason Priestley was there. And this was probably height of 90210 days. He took the day.
Oh
He
yeah.
did this PSA about gun safety. We all know what happened at West Beverly with David Silver's friend and the gun. So it was good.
Yeah, that's right. Great app. Great
Yeah.
app. They don't make TV like that anymore.
I really don't. So, but speaking of, and I swear we're going to get into this toolkit, Dad. So stick around. We're watching for the first time on Netflix Suits, which I'm just just such a fascinating watch.
Do you like that show? Do you like that?
I don't know. I can't tell if I like it or don't like it. I'll be honest. And maybe,
Spoken like a USA show watch. Let's be honest.
yeah,
Patrick
maybe by the
Adams
end of the
went to college with me.
nine seasons, I'll have an answer for you. But what is
Ooh, good luck
fascinating
with
to
that.
me is the pearl clutching over marijuana.
Oh, oh
Like
yeah.
he's bringing bags and bags of marijuana to be sold, and then maybe he failed a drug test because he had and I was just like, oh my god, this is how it was. Like now, I mean, again, like in New York City, certainly, like people are just smoking
Yeah,
reefer on the street,
yeah.
and no biggie. It's like drinking a glass of wine in
It's
the
so
park.
weird. Like I moved to Texas right before that happened. And so for me, when I'm in New York or LA, really in New York because it's such a more that's a city where you're actually encountering people and you're just like it's the marijuana's in the air. It's so crazy. You're like, wow. Wow. And you know what's so funny too is, I mean, me in my 20s would have been like, yay, heaven. It's heaven, Neil. My gosh. And yeah, it's so weird. When things got decriminalized, when medicinal marijuana came out in LA, I went to the shady doctor. I got my script. What a scene that was. It was like two, like, I'm not being racist, but two, like, gentlemen who were I believe, of Armenian descent in like jogging suits. Um, you know, I don't know, a lot of gold chain, a lot of stubble. They were just standing out front and they're like, "You're next." And I'm like, "Okay, cool." And then I went in there and there's a doctor there and he's just like, "Okay." And I'm like, "Bro, how did you end up here?" You know what I mean? You're a doctor, but who are the guys out front? And you got a big line. We're not even in Sherman Oaks. We're in Valley Village, some real working class San Fernando Valley in LA. And I'm just like, what did this guy do? How did this doctor get in with the Armenian guys? That wasn't racist. Was that racist? I don't know. I don't know.
You know what? We'll check with the TikTok
Yeah,
commenter.
yeah, yeah. Great clip for TikTok. But I got the medicinal, right? But then the stuff's super strong. It's as strong as you want it to be. And this isn't even close to like the full on what it's become now, right? And then the thing is like, it's strong. I was smoking less. And then it was like pointless. Like I wasn't with pot, like, a pothead is like, God damn, like, with my Cheerios, I need my marijuana. You know what I mean? Like I was that guy for a bit, certainly. And then it became legal and I was like, nah, little goes a long way and then a little goes way long to the point where the 20 bag was still around for like 6 months and it got dry and brittle and I was like, I don't know what to do with this anymore. I had outgrown it. And this happens. This happens. These things happen.
So we had an assembly. I don't remember what year I was. It was in high school. And
Mm-hmm.
this guy, I mean, I was just captivated. This guy comes out and he's telling us this story about he went to college and, every summer his friends would all get together and play drinking games, quarters. He was basically teaching a high school full of kids what quarters is, right?
The
The game.
rules. The actual rules.
Little beer pong, and they would have a great time. And he said that he started to really drink heavily. And one night he remembers waking up in his car driving the wrong way on the highway. On the next thing he knows, he's in a cell. Ollie, this man was serving I don't know if it was a lifetime sentence, but a lengthy sentence for vehicular manslaughter because he blacked out, got in his car, and went the wrong way on a highway and killed someone. This story is burned into my brain for 2.5 decades now and
Yeah.
counting. And really, like, truly is probably the reason I mean, I don't want to say it's the only reason, but I've never drunk and drive,
Mm,
I never understood that. I mean, I live in New York City, so you don't
that
really need
helps.
to. But even, like when I was in college in Massachusetts or
Hmm.
being in New Jersey, I always was just like, just get a cab, call someone. Like, what is this? There's such an ego, such a narcissism to me, such a selfishness to getting behind the wheel under the influence of anything, and I really don't have a tolerance for that. The people, it's fine. I'll be okay. Like, that is such a carelessness. So, we're obviously talking about drugs and drinking and smoking in general. And, we share all this, listeners, I think, just to kind of set the stage that, we're not new to this. We have lived a life. We were kids once, now we're adults. And we're here to talk about how to talk about this with our own kids at every age. And so I'll go back to the beginning, Ollie. Your son's 14, is about to
Mm-hmm.
enter high school. What's come up? What has he brought up? What have you seen with his friend group in terms of
Mm-hmm.
smoking, vaping, drinking? Have there been flasks snuck into sleepovers? What is going on with the kids?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the first way to kind of approach this is really kind of like just testing the waters with Heath himself, right? So he's not in that group. That's not his interest right now. Yeah, so yeah, he's not really in that circle. He's not going to party, social events. In fact, tonight is a school dance. It's a tri-school dance. He was like, I don't want to go. And then actually literally last night he goes, I think I want to go because some of my friends are going. I feel bad. I'm like, well, we didn't RSVP, and that's a whole other story. So he's just not really in the social circles where I think that kind of experimentation, the partying, is coming up there. And that's just really him. That's just him. So I will tell you, he is a watcher. He is not checking out the Sunday Substack of What's Dad Watching to get your reviews, but I think maybe I should encourage him to look at some of those because you do curate quite well, Neil. But look, he's watched Breaking Bad, right? He'll watch Breaking Bad. He's watched some stuff. He hasn't done the whole series, and we were talking about stuff the other day, maybe like, I don't know, a couple months ago, and he literally said, you know a lot about this stuff. And without me going, well, I've done all these things. But, there was that was kind of out there. And, we haven't, grabbed the bull by the horn, so to speak. But part of me is very much just going to explain these things, in a very, without emotional context, without me going, this is bad, don't do it. I'm like, this is what this is. And I actually can tell you, when I was in my 20s, still peeling off the old college layers, I had look, this is all in the past now, but, I may have been, hustling a little grass here and there. And a friend of mine came over and he goes, yeah, by, grab some. And he's a psychiatrist, so he's an MD. And we had a very blunt conversation about cocaine. And the way he talked about it was literally as a doctor, like just talking about what it does to you medically. And he left it out there with me kind of going, so that's what it is. And this is what you're doing to yourself. You know what I mean? And this guy was no angel either, let me tell you. LA shrink, Neil. LA shrinks, you know what I'm saying? Born and raised in Beverly Hills, no less. So he's seen some dirt. But I think that a lot of it is going to be just, as these things come up, to talk about them, in a very kind of kind of bring up what it is from a more basic scientific perspective, what this is, what this does, and then really kind of test his own curiosity of it too, because I am not a big believer in, quote, the DARE program. I feel like all these approaches, DARE, war on drugs, war on terrorism, war on immigrants, is just like the idea of like, we're gonna beat this thing, we're gonna attack it, and it's gonna disappear. That doesn't really work. I think if history's proven one thing, we are still here. Tons of wars. We've had lots of wars, Neil, and yet the sides that were fighting them are pretty much still there. Even the Native Americans, and they got slaughtered. Let's be
Sure.
honest. Let's just, go there. But yeah, that's kind of like what I'm thinking of it. And I'll just bring it up as it comes. But like right now, he's not really there. But I'm definitely keeping an eye out because I have noticed things, My son is literally, I've seen changes. Like, it is happening right now. It is happening right now. But yeah, it's kind of funny. He's quite engaged in sports. He likes his anime. He likes things that I think are a little more tied to being on the younger end of the spectrum of like developing and whatever. So We'll keep an eye on it, Neil. Just check in whenever you need to. I'll let you know.
I will check in. I did just want to circle back. It seems like, you know what we need
Toolkit.
is a war on wars.
I was like, we're obviously pushing the toolkit here. That's world's
Oh, we
greatest
are
hit.
going to push the toolkit, but we have more to cover. We have more to cover. We
Yeah, a
haven't even
war
really
on wars.
formally introduced the topic. So remember, guys, this is our big question series. This is where we discuss in an unfiltered but substantive and proactive and hopefully helpful way how to talk to your kids about difficult things, not just fun stuff like movies and food and all the as Greg Scheinman put it, it's the being the dad versus being the father. That's the fun dad stuff. We are here to be fathers and father
Hmm.
figures. So today we're talking about how to talk to your kids about drugs, alcohol, smoking, other substances that, at any age as it comes up. And so we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but, I think let's talk about why this topic is hard to talk about with your kids. And and why we shy away from it. I know my parents never really had a talk with me. It was very, whatever was told to me was very black and white, much like kind of the media messaging was. I think that's part of probably why you and so many people have an aversion to Dare is, there was this feeling like there's that scene in Mean Girls, I think, where the gym teacher says, if you if you have sex, you will get gonorrhea or syphilis and you will die. Like it was just like I thought if I smoke weed, I'm gonna die. There
You
was
believe
no,
that though? You believed that.
I don't know. I mean, like I was certainly afraid of what could happen. I don't know. Maybe there was some magical thinking going on. Certainly cocaine. I mean, God, and heroin. I mean, I guess you could die from heroin. But anyways, there was such a fear of God put into me. I was like, not going near it. Then, as when I got into college, yeah, I started experimenting with alcohol. Experimenting. I started drinking in college, and I thought, well, it's already illegal. It's illegal if I have a sip, so I might as well have ate. Feels pretty good. And then I ended up blacking out and hating myself, and that was a whole other thing. And so I do think it's, there were always those parents growing up, and I'm curious your take on this. The parents who said, well, they can drink with me in our house. The ones who were like, they know where the liquor cabinet is and they're drinking together and they learn how to do it in moderation. I mean, does it have to be a zero sum game because we know it is illegal? But I wonder if we're setting our kids up for failure by saying, all right, wait till you're 21. And if you have so much as a drop, you are a criminal and that is wrong. When we know kids are doing, kids are doing it. Kids are smoking weed. Kids are vaping. Kids are smoking. Kids are drinking alcohol in the early teens, certainly in college before they're 21. How are we, are we just going to ignore the reality or are we going to have a real conversation with them about this? So, why is it hard to talk about it? Let's get back to that because we have these fears. We are afraid of addiction. And so sometimes it's easier just not to talk about it. We
Hmm.
have maybe guilt about our own past experiences. We don't know how to tell our kids, well, I did it, but I don't want you to do it. We have shame about our own past. And frankly, I think sometimes we just don't know how we feel about, our own our current relationship to drugs and alcohol. It can also be triggering for a lot of adults. It can trigger like bad memories about, maybe first times getting really drunk, getting really high, maybe friends who overdosed, friends who became addicts. And so
Right.
times we lied to our parents and carried that shame. There is so much baggage. And I think, part of being a parent is like figuring out how to unpack your own baggage and break that cycle too, right? So the thing that what the research says, Ollie, is that kids form beliefs about substances, drugs, and alcohol way earlier than parents think, right? Like
Hmm.
4, 5, 6 years old, they are curious, they are seeing it.
Hmm.
My kids will see beer in the fridge and they go, I want a beer. They're aware, they know what it is. And so, this idea that, like, if we don't talk about it, it will delay, having to face this issue, it's here, it's present. It's around us. It's family members, peers, other adults are partaking, are having conversations about it. And so like everything else, with this big question series, why not make ourselves the drivers of those conversations?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny. Like, I remember Heath as a little kid, like, we were playing. And you know, it's so funny. When we moved to Austin, Heath was like 3. And one of the things that really was challenging, because Briley and I, like, we both drink and we both went out. We went to clubs in Las Vegas. Like, that was part of, our, like, lifestyle. And then you have a kid and you're like, what do we do now? Like, oh, do you have to go get a sitter? Even just going out for a beer. Like, you can't bring your kid to a bar, but you can go to a restaurant and have a beer. Austin was a paradise for us as young parents. You could push a stroller, freaking this fancy supermarket, which is like a Whole Foods. There was like a beer garden there, breweries welcome families. You know what I mean? All of a sudden it's like, oh, cool. Like, let's normalize alcohol in families. And as a society, we clearly normalize alcohol. You go to these places and it's kid friendly. There's games. You can, like, whatever, not like pickleball, but whatever, toss a frisbee or whatever. I remember Heath as a little kid going, put your drink down, put your drink down. Because we're like having that beer so we could play with him. And it's kind of funny how, you know, you don't think about it as much, but alcohol is so normalized. But at the same time, it's so interesting that you realize your kids see it all the time. You see beer, you smell it, And what's weird is you see and smell something you don't partake in. Like, I remember, like, going to baseball games as a kid and just like it was, alcohol is dangerous, right? People can get aggressive, people can get wild, unpredictable. And, like, I remember that feeling of being in a place where there was alcohol. Because the other times you'd be around, I mean, my parents and their friends being Muslim, there was no alcohol. So there was a different kind of behavior and obviously sporting event, whatever. But I think it's so weird hearing you say that because he has experienced it. And he's said this bluntly. There are times where I have been drunk and I mean, not like, I don't know, like a stereotypical 80s show, like falling down the stairs, like screaming in anger, but, not sober, and like if we're having any kind of disagreement or something like that, he can throw this in my face. You're inebriated right now, Dad. You're intoxicated. Like, he'll say that, like, to kind of get a rise out of me, not because I'm, some 80s villain character, you know what I mean? Throwing a wine glass at the wall. And it's weird. Like, we literally got into a place right now, January 23rd, 2026, where we're doing dry January because of a dynamic. I was like, does it make sense with Heath being older for us to drink more than just like a glass of wine at dinner? Because that's not what we're talking about, like engage in the act of drinking.
But the dry January, I presume that's a zero. You're having zero alcoholic drinks this month.
I mean, I'm having non-NA beer here and there, which it's kind of weird because if you look at it, there is, I mean, it's trace alcohol, but in the past, I've like never done that. But what's kind of fun about the NA beer is like, I feel like I'm having a beer and then I'm done. You know what I mean? Yeah.
It's a mental trick, and I think it's so interesting. I don't think I have an addictive personality, but I do have a compulsive personality.
Mm-hmm.
And as we learn about ourselves, like I don't have this, oh, I'm itching for this thing, but I have these kind of habits and itches that I want to scratch and little like comfort blankets. And I think like the more that you can set yourself up for healthier habits, and I definitely have found that with the NA beers, it is it has, it's the same way, I drink coffee all day. I think part of it is just habitual. I have that oral fixation, that activity, that feeling that like distracts my brain. And similarly, if I've had a long day, rather than going for a Heineken or Blue Moon has NAs. I have a 6 pack of Blue Moon NAs in my fridge right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's, it just kind of makes you feel relaxed because so much of it is meditative. And I think it's a great segue because we're going to talk about what alcohol and drugs are and aren't, literally just by definition, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how we can think of them. Because I think, often they are this kind of boogeyman, this vague, evil thing, this force. Certainly that's how I was taught about drugs and alcohol as a kid. But let's talk about what drugs and alcohol are and aren't. So, drugs and alcohol are substances that alter your brain and body. Fact. That's it. That's what a drug is. A substance that alters your brain and body. But There is a distinction between legal versus illegal and safe versus unsafe, right? Just because something is illegal doesn't mean it's unsafe. It doesn't. Like, that's just a scientific fact. But there are reasons for legality and illegality, and we also know that, just because something's illegal doesn't mean that it will always be illegal. And so what we want to talk about and what we're going to frame this conversation around is context. The risk of drugs and alcohol altering your brain and body and the damage it could do short term, long term depends on your age. It depends on where you are with brain development, physical development, and the risk also varies based on situational and behavioral context. Like we were talking about before, if you're driving or planning to drive, the risk goes way up, right? If you're at a job or you're in a, high stakes social situation, the risk goes way up versus if you're safe, home, not planning to go anywhere with a friend or a guardian who you can trust. That is not the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not saying everybody go out there, go do an 8 ball. But I am saying we have to be realistic and honest
Mm-hmm.
about the ways that these mind-altering substances, the risk they pose is very informed by the context of the people consuming them and the situations they're consuming them in. So that's kind of just a primer before we get into the toolkit and the age by age guidance.
I have to say, that was so enlightening to hear someone say just because it's illegal doesn't mean it's. I would even say this. Well, again, doesn't mean it's unsafe, which isn't. It just shatters the one to one, right? It's funny too. I'll tell you. You want to talk about being in a safe place? Swear to God, in college, sophomore year, maybe junior year, and this just depends on who you are, how you grew up. This guy who I knew from college, his mom came to visit, grew up in Northern California, progressive part of the country, Neil, pretty progressive. They were sitting there on the floor doing mushrooms together. Him and his mom, tripping balls, mushrooms. I watched him. I was like, and I was just like, I was not on mushrooms, but I was pretty stoned. And I was just like, and I'm sure at the time I was like, that's so no way. It's just, oh, that's wrong. I don't know. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and look, I mean, it's so interesting too, right? Like we are parents, that is why we're doing this. We have parents and and they had parents too, and everybody has their own kind of attitude towards drugs and alcohol that they pass down both explicitly and implicitly. The implicit being like what they saw you actually doing, the explicit like what you told them to do, that whole do as I say, not as I do. It's funny, anytime my parents are walking around with me in New York City and you smell marijuana, this has happened on many occasions now over the last decade and a half,
Mm-hmm.
my parents will go, somebody's having fun. And I think about that like progressive, commercial about like, we can't help you from turning into your parents. Like it's the most like just parent thing to somebody's having fun.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, they're smoking weed. They're getting a little high.
You realize whatever parent said that is basically pulling Adam Goldberg's line from Dazed and Confused before he gets jumped by Nicky Cat at the party at the Moon Tower. He goes, oh, someone's having a good time. And then Nicky Cat's like, what? What'd you say? What'd you say? He like gets in his face. And Adam Goldberg's like, nothing. I was just making an observation. Oh, yeah? Why don't you observe this, Einstein, when I kick your ass? Yeah, I'm a stoner. I'm having fun. It was so funny that you said that, dude. Obviously, I just said this because as a mental note, it's a bookmark for us to add that scene and then cut to your dad or your mom and then Adam Goldberg because it's spot on. It literally.
Well, I can tell you with almost 100% certainty that neither of my parents have ever seen that film.
Yeah, I mean it's fair.
Yeah,
it's fair.
You're not. I love them to death. Not cool enough to have watched a
I
Richard.
mean, maybe they just. I don't know. Would they have been? How old would they have been in like 1973? No, 77.
Dazed and Confused? That came out in the 90s.
But it took place in 76.
Okay. But We're talking about, so what? You think that it was just like a documentary? It was a scripted film from the 90s.
I mean, no, you know what's funny? You know what's funny? That movie, you want to talk about glorifying alcohol at a young age and drugs?
Yes, I do.
That movie was like, we would get psyched up to go out. We'd watch that movie and then we'd be like, let's try and go and party. And then the reality is, you never find a party that cool. But that was our blueprint. That was like, look, and that also was a blueprint for fraternity sorority life. I mean, the hazing, the whole hazing rituals and stuff like that.
Right. And that
You've
was,
seen this movie, right, Neil? Please.
I'll be honest, seen bits and pieces. I've never seen it all the way through.
Have you watched any Linklater? Probably
Yes.
Boyhood.
Guess what? Guess which Linklater
Before
movie?
Sunrise.
Bingo.
Jeez, pat over, get out of the coffee shop, put down your poetry book, and take off the beret. We gotta get loose.
I mean, that trilogy is just made for me.
You wanna know something? Never seen it.
Okay.
I've never seen it.
I saw Before Sunset first, then I saw Before Sunrise, and then, of course, years later, Before Midnight came out. And I think I was already married at the time. And I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
God, I love those films. And I'm a huge Ethan Hawke fan. Huge.
Me too. Me
Love that
too.
guy.
Big, yeah. It's kind of crazy now because I see Ethan Hawke and I'm like, that's what I know. Like, I'm old. I'm like, wow, Ethan Hawke, because he was like, oh my god, he was baby faced in the Denzel in Training Day. He was baby faced then.
Yeah.
That was a long time ago.
I mean, but, he was 17 at Dead Poets. He's been at this for 40 years, so.
He is, yes. Okay, Ethan Hawke's great. We're both on the same
Let's
page
get
there.
back on track about drugs and alcohol. Although, good segue, Training Day. Denzel does make him do some drugs in the car, so, you're keeping it on theme. So why are we doing this episode? We're just going to keep hammering it home because we want to talk to our kids about drugs and alcohol in a positive, productive way. I think we both can attest, people of a certain age, certain generation, we either grew up with total silence about drugs and alcohol or total scare tactics. And neither is great. You're going to die, or we're just not talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
We got to find the middle ground. So, when you approach the drugs and alcohol conversation that way, which is to say either absence of the conversation or complete fear mongering, you're encouraging kids to not tell you stuff, to not be curious, to not ask questions. And that ain't a good thing. We want our kids to be curious, right? So what does the research say, Ollie? Well, the research, according to the CDC, if you believe those quacks,
is that still around anymore?
I know. Early ongoing conversations actually delay kids' first use of drugs and alcohol. Ironically, people think, oh, we don't want to talk about it. You talk about it with your kids, there's a greater likelihood that they will experiment, start using drugs and alcohol for the first time later. So have those conversations early. Scare tactics, research shows, actually increase their curiosity and rebellion. I know, paradoxical, but you tell them, and not for me, but for most people, normal people, they're going to want to go try it. So you tell them not to, they're going to want to do it. Don't try to scare anybody straight. It doesn't work. Parental warmth and clear boundaries are the most protective thing you can do to keep your kids safe from the dangers of drugs and alcohol. Adolescents, there's been a lot of research about this, they are neurologically wired for risk taking. It's evolution. They are experimenting and trying to figure out what they can tolerate, what they can't, what they can get away with, what they can't, what it will do to them, just the brain chemistry. And so, the risk goes way up in adolescence. And the thing is, we talk about addiction risk. The earlier you start using drugs and alcohol, the greater likelihood you have of developing an addiction too. And so the longer you can delay the start of using whatever substance it may be, the better you are going to be to stave off any kind of addiction. Not saying it won't happen, but you're just decreasing the odds. So talking about drugs, good thing. It does not increase use. Silence and secrecy have been shown to increase drug use. Any questions before we head to the toolkit?
I have to tell you, on the note of kids at an age actually, taking on risky behavior or just looking at it differently than we would. I literally was handed a book by a fellow volleyball dad, and all our kids are 13, 14, we're in that age bracket. And it was written by I want to say psychologist, probably a psychiatrist. I want to say psychiatrist, at least a psychologist. And basically and also a mom. And literally, they broke down like a study, if you will, of how the brain works about hearing something like, hey, do you think we should jump off this cliff and see if we can land on that rock? And an adult will be like, no way. That they respond with fear. They automatically jump to the worst case scenario, and they're like, no way, they're not doing it. And the teenage mind is like, okay, let's think about this here. Like, is it possible? What are the odds? How could I mitigate the danger? It's literally just how the brain's choosing to work versus going, oh, I just want to make a bad decision. It's just a different way it works. It is at an age where it's working differently. God, that's almost the biggest thing too, right? I think as a parent is like, there's this stuff out there and you might try it, and that impossible for me to say never try it. However, just be aware of addiction, because addiction that's something you can expose to. Like, this is someone who's an addict who's stressed the rest of their lives struggling to not be addicted to something. That to me is like, that's how I look at. Now, literally, I'm like, I know I'm going to look at talking to drugs with Heath. It's like, there's drugs and then there's addiction. Let's talk about addiction, because I think that's my approach. I'm good. I think I'm good. Great toolkit, Neil. Great chat.
Hey, let's go through the toolkit. The people want it. The people demand our A through H toolkit. You're right. That's why they come. That's why they wade through 45 minutes of us talking about our own experiences so that they can get the toolkit. They're not here for us. So here's your toolkit. Okay. Here is your toolkit for how to talk to your kids about drugs and alcohol. Tool A, ask questions before you lecture. We often start with this. It's all about the questions, right? So say to your kids, what have you heard about drugs and alcohol? What do you know about it? What are your friends saying about it? What's the word at the playground? What's the word on the street? Seriously, tool A, ask questions. Ask your kids about drugs and alcohol. Ask your kids what they know. You got to ask. That's your starting point, okay? That's tool A. You want to avoid opening with rules. You don't want to say, this is what you do, and warnings. And this is because you want to center their reality. You want to meet them where they are. They're living, their life with their friends. You are not there every day, every minute. You don't know what these conversations are. You don't know what the pressures are. So in order to try to understand them, you got to just hear it straight from them. You can't assume it's the same as when you were in high school in 1994. You know what I'm saying? So tool B, validate their curiosity without validating using. So you can say, yeah, it makes sense you're curious. Of course, that's so normal. But what you don't have to add is a statement like, well, everybody does it. You don't need to say that. You don't need to normalize the using of drugs, but you can certainly normalize the curiosity. This shows that you trust them and their instincts, but that you don't have to normalize the behavior of using drugs. Kind of a distinction there. B, validate curiosity, don't validate use. Tool C, separate identity from behavior. So you want to say something like, trying drugs, trying alcohol, it doesn't make you bad. It doesn't make someone a bad kid. There's no value judgment, right? It doesn't say who you are. It's just a behavior. So again, always separating the label and the identity from the behavior itself. You want to avoid saying things like only losers do drugs, or, drugs make you a bad person. And why is that? Because again, we know kids are curious. They may end up trying it or really want to try it. And you don't want them to feel like, oh, then I'm bad. Then I'm a loser. I can't share this with my parents. Because if they're interested in trying it or they did try it, you want them to be able to tell you, right? You don't want them to be in this shame spiral. So don't say that. If their friends use it, don't say, oh, well, that kid's a loser. Say, oh, wow, okay, thank you for sharing that with me. I really appreciate that you can be open and honest. Separate the identity from the behavior. That's tool C. Tool D, use clear, honest language. Don't obfuscate. Say, alcohol slows your brain. Channel Ollie's LA doctor friend. Just tell it like it is. What's the science? Drugs can change how your brain works, especially while it's growing. Period. You don't want to, get into some sort of scary story, exaggerate. Tell the truth. Tell it like it is.
Mm-hmm.
Kids can handle the truth. They can handle the truth better than they can handle fear mongering. So just use honest language. Tell them the truth. Tell them the science. That's tool D. Tool E. Here's where you put your dad cap on, your father hat. Yeah. Say, you want to set expectations, but not give threats. Set expectations without threats. So you can say stuff like, in our family, we don't drink until 21. But if you ever feel like you're in
I thought you were going to say, we don't drink until noon.
Hey, noon. When you're 21, you can drink at noon. It's legal. Not safe, but it is legal, remember. If you're ever, you want to say to your kid, if you're in a situation where you feel unsafe, I'll come get you. No punishment, right? So
That to me is the number one thing. It's like, please don't get behind. Like, to me, I'm like, okay, it's like, just don't get behind the wheel for God's sakes. Please, please. But the problem is like, you make these decisions, and I've made these decisions too. You're not clear at it. You know what I mean? You're like, I'm invincible. I can make it. I can drive home. So
yes, but I will say the more, that this conversation has been had and it becomes a core value, people make mistakes, sure, but I think the less likely you're going to be to go make that decision. If it's been hammered home, I'll pick you up.
yeah.
You won't hesitate to say, hey, can you pick me up? If that has been ingrained into you. But if you've been told, don't you do that, that's bad, you're bad, you might not make that phone call, and you might be more likely to make a bad decision. So set expectations without threats. Hey, we really don't do this in this family, but if you you ever need me, just call. I will be there. I think you'd rather your kid call you, after making a bad decision than not call you, right? So that's tool E. Tool F, rehearse real life scenarios. You were an actor. Rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. You can role play. It feels weird, but act out what it's like being offered a drink, what it's like having to leave a party, texting for help. You want to teach your kids scripts, just no thanks. Oh, I got a big game tomorrow. Or
This is getting a little dare. I'll be honest. You are talking to a guy who did educational theater. I've done these scenes. Maybe I'll just whip them out, just to be nostalgic.
Hey, look, I think you got to do it in a way that suits your comfort level, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I do think rehearsing, we'll sometimes tell our daughter, not with drugs and alcohol, but hey, you can blame us, right? You give your kid permission to make you the heavy, it kind of does wonders, right? Because you don't care if their friends like you or think you're cool, but they very much do. And when you have to create that binary choice for them, it's really hard. And so part of, I think, rehearsing, having a script of what to say if they're feeling peer pressured or in a tough situation, it's not the worst tool in the world. So look, again, it's a toolkit. You use the ones you need. But tool F is rehearse real life scenarios. Help your kids create a script to get out of difficult situations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
No,
right.
it is. That's what's so interesting too, is I don't, and this could all change, but there is a, look, real talk too, with parents, you kind of see the potential of these groups being formed and what these groups are getting into. You know what I mean? And thus far, he is not in a group that you might assume might be on the fast track to experimenting, which is never an absolute. But, some things, do stay evergreen. The clothes may change, but the attitude behind it is still there, And I think that is something you just gotta be real. But, you could be one of those parents like your friend with the 2 hot tubs who's like, my kids are never going to public school. They all do drugs.
That's
We
right.
can't help her.
Mother of the year. Tool G, monitor patterns. Look for secrecy, mood changes, declining school performance. Sounds obvious, but sometimes the obvious things are worth stating. It's the old, what is that, razors, Occam's razor? Occam's razor? I don't know.
I've heard of it. I've heard of it.
Yeah, all right.
You like to
Put it in the show notes. But yeah, Tool G, just monitor patterns,
yeah.
and we're not talking about one bad grade or one outburst. Start to track, if things are on a decline, I'm not saying your kid's using, but you want to be aware. You don't want to be caught off guard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rule H, anchor safety and belonging. Tell your kids explicitly, you can call me. You can always call. You don't lose my love if you mess up. People make mistakes. Not encouraging them to, but they need to know that you will be there no matter what, right? And this has been shown to reduce hiding behaviors, and risk taking. Just knowing that their kid would be there or that their parent would be there. I mean, we all, I think, hopefully knew those kids, if we weren't those kids ourselves, whose parents were just like, yeah, I'll be there in a sec, right? You want to be that parent. You want to be that dad that will be there at 3 in the morning. Just call me. I'll be there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. And that's your toolkit, A through E.
It's funny. You can look at this stuff, and obviously you have to be in a position where you're willing to have a conversation with your kids and, be able to have a two-way conversation and hear what they have to say, except when they may do something that may not be to your expectations, even when it's something that's as dangerous as, oh my God, you experimented with hard drugs. I mean, these things happen, it ain't all sunshine and rainbows, right? But I will tell you, even in the most not, there's an approach to this where it's like, oh, hey, I'm chill dad. I do yoga sometimes. You know what I mean? I wear open-toed shoes 2 days a week. You know what I mean? They might be open to like talking about a toolkit, but then you could have some old school type dad. They're still out there. Who'd be like, yeah, no, my kid will never do drugs. Yeah, not me, not my son. But I will tell you something. I grew up and went to a pretty elitist and pretty certainly more comfortable on the conservative side of things school. And this was in the 90s. Different time, actually. Different time compared to now. But there was a kid in my class, right? And he grew up in a very wealthy, politically connected family. He was a kid who was part of a group that was definitely that group that's on the fast track to experiment. They were, popular. They were just kind of alphas. Out of this group, this one kid did not touch marijuana. He would not go past alcohol, right? And it was kind of like, wow, how is it he's able to do that? Or, yeah, like, I don't even want to say his name, but blah, 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 won't touch this stuff. You know what I mean? But he's still cool around it. And apparently his family said, listen, we know you're going to be around this stuff, okay? And it is what it is, And I'm kind of paraphrasing, but I heard this as a child, you know what I mean? But basically they were like, their toolkit solution was, listen, we don't want you to jeopardize your future, basically inferring a potential political career, because if you had done, if you smoked weed, there's no way you could be president. And I might be pushing it, but that was the heart of it. That was the root of it. So even with a family that's like essentially like a classic staunch conservative Reaganite, you can still talk to your kids and at least say what you have to say and be realistic, because they literally said, they weren't like, no, you can't hang out with those friends because they all smoke weed. They were like, no, they're your friends. We get that. But they just said, you can jeopardize your future with
Sure.
that. And while that may seem like not the most ideal, enlightened way, not that the dads like us who wear open-toed shoes 2 times a week. You've got winter, I don't. But, but it worked. It worked. You know what I mean? And I don't know the full scenario about what this guy did or didn't do, but he was able to hang out with friends who did stuff, and he didn't do it. And I think that's, admirable. I mean, as dads, you're like, well, that's cool. You know what I mean? That is cool.
So shout out Senator Josh Hawley, grew up with Ali Khan, never touched the stuff, but
Believe me, we'll talk more about this offline. You'll be like, no friggin' way.
yeah. Well, obviously you're making me think about how just even the conversation around marijuana and drugs has changed for politicians. Bill Clinton famously said, "I did not inhale."
Right.
Said a lot of
Yeah.
things, and then when they asked Obama, did you smoke marijuana? And he said, yeah. And they said, did you inhale? He said, what's kind of the point?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yes. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, we are still in the midst of the dare.
So let's go through the age by age and then we'll wrap this out. But
All right.
so kids are going to have questions. They're going to have different types of questions about drugs and alcohol depending on their age. Kids aged 3 to 5, they're just really curious. What is this? What's going on? What is that drink, Daddy?
Mm-hmm.
So, this is not a time for substance abuse prevention lecture necessarily. This is what is that in your glass, right? So they are literal thinkers, 3 to 5 year olds. They're pattern matching. They see you pour something, they go, "Can I have some?" And this is sometimes where parents will panic and they will lie and they will say, "Oh, it's soda, it's grown up juice, it's spicy juice, it's coffee for adults." You think you're being protective, but this will create confusion later. So what helps is the boring, simple truth. You just say, "This is a grown up drink. It's called alcohol. It makes your body feel funny. It's not for kids." That's it. You can say that. You can say that. You can tell your kids this is alcohol. It's for grown-ups and not kids. That's it. You don't need to talk about addiction. You don't need to talk about liver disease. You don't have to talk about blacking out in college. They're 5. Just say this is not for kids. That's it. That's where it can land. But don't lie. Get a little older, all right? They're a little more curious about why are you drinking this? Ages 6 to 9, why can grown-ups drink? They're all about like what's fair and what's not fair. Why can't I? Why can you? And this is when they're saying, well, you have wine, why can't I? And parents, tend to sometimes moralize, well, because it's bad for kids. Or they start to get into like the addiction science and stuff. Here's what you say to your kids when they're like 6 to 9. You say, your brain is still growing. Alcohol and drugs, they affect how your brain grows. They can really mess it up while you're at this age. And we want you to have a healthy, growing brain. So, grown-ups' brains, for better or worse, are done growing. And so our bodies just handle these differently, right? So you want to normalize that adult-only substances, they're not glamorous. They're just for adults, we're just in a different phase of life. And if they say, well, I get to try it one day, you can say, when you're older, we can talk about it. You don't have to freak out. You don't have to catastrophize. Just say, we'll talk about it when you're older. But right now, your brain is growing, and that's your brain's job. And we want to make sure that it does a good job growing. So you can't have it yet. Ages 10 to 12. They're going to start to wonder if this is going to maybe happen, be around them a little bit earlier in life. They're going to say, well, what if my friends are doing it? What if my friends try it? It stops being theoretical, right? Kids are going to say, they're going to start hearing about seeing vaping, edibles. They're going to start hearing about parties. There are older siblings. There's always that one kid with the older sibling, right? And parents start to get in full fear mode, right? They're like, don't go to public school, right? If you live in Sag Harbor and have 2 hot tubs, because everyone does drugs there. So, you want to make sure that your kids feel, again, safe and prepared for the reality of these situations that they're probably going to end up around, if not then, certainly in a year or two, right, in high school. So this is where the script comes in for ages 10 to 12. You say, in our family, we don't drink or use drugs until we're adults. That's a family rule. Remember, if you're ever in a situation where you feel unsafe, I'll come get you, no questions asked. That's it. I'm there for you. You feel pressured or you made a decision that we preferred you didn't. Hey, we'll deal with that later. You are safe to call us. You want to acknowledge the real world they're living in, not this la la land of my kid's perfect and will never make a mistake or never put themselves in a situation. Life happens, reality happens. We are here to get you out of it, not to suffer no consequences, but to help keep you safe, especially when you're asking us for help, right? That's what we want to do. So 10 to 12, hey, do the script. If you're in a bad situation, we'll help you out of it. But these are the rules. Set the expectations. Teens. Now, teens are going to say things like, well, everyone's doing it. Everyone does it. It's not a big deal. This is a danger zone where you parents might feel that tendency, that itch to lecture. Don't do it. You start with a lecture, you lose. You've lost, right? And so what they need is honesty. Teenagers need honesty and harm reduction. So you don't want to say, do this and you die. You don't want to say, whatever, do whatever you want. It's your life. But you do want to say like, hey, here are the risks of doing this, right? Here's the reality. Here's what could happen to you. And I want you to know the truth, which is alcohol lowers your judgment. Alcohol and drugs do affect your brain, and they do affect your brain more when you're young. That's just a scientific fact. You need to know that. Your brain is not fully formed, I think, until you're 26. Same age, you have to get kicked off your parents' health insurance, you know?
Or rent a car.
There you go. Well, maybe that's why. Because your brain is fully formed, you can rent a car. And you know, and then also tell your kids, hey, mixing substances makes things more dangerous. Just lay it all out. Show them the science. They're smart. They can handle it. Trust your kid. But yeah, certainly if they're saying, well, everybody's doing it, like that doesn't mean that it's safe. That doesn't mean that it's okay for our family. And you really just have to do such a delicate dance here of not lecturing and being open and honest and having a real conversation. So, and after that, then they're 21. They can do whatever they want, right? So after the teenage years, and that's kind of the gist. Anything you think that our listeners might benefit from as we wrap out this big questions about drug and alcohol episode, Ollie?
Yeah, I think it's just like, especially because I'm kind of almost knee deep in like the high school era, right? And also, apparently, sending my kid potentially to public school means he's just going to be, under a bridge, drool coming out of his mouth. But I think it is just constantly like checking in with yourself. And also, like, one thing I found, and this is the dry January, a big reason for it was, what's the behavior we're modeling? The thing is like, our relationship with drugs and alcohol change family to family. And also, I think even if it's not something that happens in your household, it's important to remember that certainly as a society in America, we normalize alcohol so much. It's so normalized. And obviously, marijuana is definitely moving in that direction in some parts of the country too. And even if it's not something that is part of your household, it is out there in the world. So I think there's like kind of two ways to approach this stuff too, is like, what is it that like is your own family, your own family culture, and then the culture of the world, the culture around you. And, I think I was coming from a place where it was like, oh, it was so taboo culturally for my family that it was also part of the curiosity of getting out there. But I think that's something to kind of be aware of too, is like, what are your own behaviors? What are your own kind of rules around this stuff that you personally practice? And how will that translate to your kid's perception of it too? Because I don't know with Heath, he may not be like, yeah, my mom and dad do that, so it can't be that cool. I don't know. I don't have the answers, but I do know that it is important for parents to even look at their relationship with this stuff, and whether you do it or not, that can affect how they view it and their curiosity for it too. So yeah, it's a great toolkit though, Neil. Got me thinking. I needed this. I'm not just a co-host, I'm also an audience member, a parent too that needs the help.
He's the best customer.
Yeah, totally.
All right, well, thanks, Ollie, and thanks everybody for joining us for our
Yeah.
big questions, how to talk to kids about drugs and alcohol. We'll see you next time.
We called Josh Holly the hot dog. Like, hey, hot dog. Hey, hot dog. He's like, hey, what's up? What's up?
Maybe he
Want to go
should
crush a beer?
maybe he should have smoked a little weed and he wouldn't be trying to ravage our democracy. But all right, we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Could have been. Could have, should have, would have.